Good evening and welcome to the Japan Earth Observer for June 12, 2026. This is the first of what might become a regular update on the space, Earth observation, and geospatial industries in Japan. By way of introduction, my name is Robert Cheatham. I run a strategy and research consulting firm called Abaca Labs, and I write a newsletter also called Japan Earth Observer. A little bit about my background. For almost 25 years, I ran a geospatial software engineering company called Xavia. After selling that company to Element 84 and working there for a brief period as chief strategy officer, I was laid off at the end of 2023. I took this as an opportunity to do some traveling to a few places in the Asia Pacific region. Part of that journey was a trip to Japan, where I had lived, studied, and worked for 4 years in my early 20s. I'd only been back briefly in the intervening 30 years. But this time I spent a few weeks there on my own, and I felt a kind of joy and satisfaction that felt revelatory. I determined to, when I returned to the States, commit to investing more of my time in studying the Japanese language again, as well as trying to find a way to connect my 3 decades of professional life in the geospatial and Earth observation industry to my previous life in Japan. Out of that effort was born the Japan Earth Observer newsletter, which I've been running for the last year and a half, some consulting projects in Asia, and other activities that have proven quite meaningful. This particular experiment with a weekly YouTube version is an extension of that effort. But it's not solely my own idea. Last week, Will Waters over the Geospatial 500 channel asked me to do a short Japan segment on his weekly geospatial market update, and I ended up preparing too much material, which is probably not surprising for those of you who know me. And that got me thinking that it might make sense to do a more extended standalone version. So hat tip to Will for inspiring me to explore this new format.
So let's dive into the news. This week, the big event today was the SpaceX IPO, and it seems to have been a success. A lot of demand for it since trading started in the mid morning. On the Japan front, though, SpaceX agreed to allocate more shares to Japanese retail investors for IPO day, increasing from about $500 million to $2.5 billion based on a huge surge in demand. Japanese household assets are around 15 trillion or more. That was at the end of 2025, and they grow monthly in net. And about half of that is in cash or cash equivalents. Japan has not had a major IPO since SoftBank went public in 2018. In addition, Japan has a very streamlined IPO process called public offering without listing, or POWL. And this makes it relatively simple for companies listing in Europe or North America to be able to also list their shares in Japan and be able to enable retail investors to purchase them. Demand already far exceeds the number of shares allocated to Japanese retail investors, so similar to the US market, only a subset are going to get a chance to buy shares today. But the major news from a Japan perspective is really the H3 rocket. The H3 is JAXA's flagship rocket. It's been grounded since December when the H3 Flight 8 failed. It's also, last night, the H3 Flight 6. You'll notice that's a little bit out of sequence, but this flight has actually been waiting for a while to launch. This is the first of a new model, a Type 30. This return to flight was a smashing success. It was able to test both a new attachment mechanism with a payload simulator, as well as that enabled them to validate a fix from the flight aid failure, as well as 6 civilian research and technology demonstration payloads. The 30S, which is the model that was being tested in the flight last night, is the last of the 4 models that had not yet flown. And if you the designations there for the different model numbers correspond to the number of liquid engines, the LE9 um, liquid engines in the main booster. And then the second digit is the number of solid rocket boosters tacked onto the side. So the 30 has no solid boosters, but has 3 liquid engines. 22 has 2 solid boosters and 2 engines, and so on. The S and the L correspond to the short or long fairing, depending on the size of the satellite being lifted. So this was a pretty big success for JAXA. Um, the return to flight was extremely important for Japan as well as for development of the rest of the global launch economy, with growing launch demand from a mix of communications, satellites, Earth observation, and recent demand for at least testing the potential for orbital data centers. We've had an increasingly constrained launch supply environment. The Starship, SpaceX Starship, has been grounded for an FAA investigation after a serious anomaly on the last flight. The Vulcan is grounded for the same reason. Blue Origin just had a spectacular explosion last week and is now grounded. Other than Ariane 6, Europe still has no successful commercial launch providers. ISAR is supposed to try again next week, but hasn't yet been successful at getting to orbit. JAXA really wants to be able to have a domestic capability to launch without the need for um, contracting with foreign providers. But not only has the H3 been grounded, but JAXA also develops a smaller rocket series known as Epsilon that it uses for sounding rockets and launching small science and research payloads like those on this flight. Next generation Epsilon S, however, is also grounded after multiple engine test failures. In its absence, JAXA has been forced to contract with Rocket Lab, a New Zealand and US launch company, for the types of research and technology demonstrations that are in this launch. JAXA has a bunch of H3 rocket launches that are high priority for the current fiscal year. One is the Mars Moon Explorer, probably expected to go in the fall. There are 2 cargo missions to the ISS, HTV X2 and X3. JAXA wants to get the Michibiki 7 or QZSS 7 navigation satellite launched, and a variety of other needs. Japan does not just have the JAXA-sponsored rockets H3 and Epsilon. It also has a half dozen or so private sector launch companies at various stages of development. Um, these include Space One, operating out of Spaceport Key in Wakayama. It's had 3 of its Kairos launches not make it, but it's still plugging away. Innovative Space Carrier is launching the Taiki spaceport in Hokkaido, aiming for a 2028 suborbital launch. Mjolnir Spaceworks has a hybrid liquid-solid engine and a weldless fuel tanks that make it a little unique. It recently closed a 1.7 billion yen in Series B funding. A couple that folks may not be familiar with, though, include Iwaya Giken, startup aimed at getting passengers to stratospheric height via a balloon. You see an example here. And Astro X, which is working on building a Raccoon, a rocket carried to the stratosphere via balloon and then launched to orbit from there. Suborbital test for that is currently planned for December later this year. There also are dark horses like Honda. Wouldn't normally associate Honda with rocket launches, but they made a surprise launch last year of a launch and reusable landing capability. It was a scale model, but pretty impressive from a company that no one realized was working on this. Next story is IHI Corporation. IHI Corporation has a subsidiary called IHI Aerospace. IHI Corporation, if you're not familiar with it, used to be known as the Ishikawajima Harima Heavy Industries. It competes with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Kawasaki Heavy Industries. It's basically a big engineering firm that designs, produces, and sells ships, space launch vehicles, engines, marine diesel engines, gas turbines, railway systems, turbochargers, all kinds of stuff, industrial machinery. They have got in some trouble though, and have been banned from bidding for any JAXA work for the next 5 months. The improper billing was actually reported by IHI Aerospace, the subsidiary of IHI, but it was based on falsified maintenance reports. Even if I guess you admit it yourself, having falsified maintenance reports doesn't look good. 14 instances of them since 2016, totaling 50 to 60 million yen in improper billing. I mean, that's not a ton of money. That's probably about a half million or less in dollar amounts, but not a good look for IHI. And they've had previous issues in this area. In February 2024, whistleblower reported another subsidiary, IHI Power Systems, had falsified its engine data since 2003. So I don't think it's been entirely this news, but some of it has certainly sent the stock price down. IHI has had strong earnings that beat estimates, but the stock has fallen from an all-time high of 4,698 yen in February this year, falling almost 50% and falling again this week. IHI is a pretty important player in the Earth observation industry. It's building out a third Japanese SAR constellation by purchasing ISI satellites, the Finnish company, and it took delivery of the first satellites, that new constellation, last week, and is ramping up domestic manufacturing in Japan. So it's pretty important that they be operational. I'm sure that in the long run, this will turn out to be a short-term hiccup, but not a good look for IHI. Next story is around a collaborative effort between 17 nations that Japan has been involved with to launch the GUIDE subsea cable protection framework. GUIDE stands for Guiding Principles for Underwater Infrastructure Defense Exchange. This was launched at the Shangri-La Dialogue. The voluntary framework aims to protect submarine telecoms and energy cables by sharing information about where those cables run and establishing positive, proactive norms. The initial signatories this past week included Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. Japan, the US, and China are not part of that initial list, but I know that Japan is interested in this in particular. There's specific concerns related to cuts near Taiwan. It's kind of a recurring infrastructure vulnerability. An analysis of an April 2026, which is a couple months ago, cut of the Matsu Islands cable. This is the third time in 4 years that the same cable had been cut mysteriously. Coincidentally, I'm sure, a Chinese salvage vessel, the Hai Honggong 66, took an unusual meandering path near the cable just before it was severed. I'm sure it had no connection. Repairs for this sort of thing cost $1 to $3 million per incident, but the big cost is time. It takes months to book a repair vessel, and it takes a long time to get these back into working order. All right. Next story is also China related. For those of you who aren't aware, China has been flexing its rare earths muscle vis-a-vis Japan by banning 20 Japanese companies from exports of rare earth minerals and putting 20 others on a watch list that require prior permission, which is pretty hard to get. The justification that they've presented is alleged remilitarization. Kind of a tough row to hoe, in my opinion, given how much China's military is ramping up. But these heavy rare earths, they include things like dysprosium, terbium, and gallium, remain now pretty much halted. You can see in the graph here, March and April had huge declines, and May is pretty much zero. This squeeze is really threatening high-tech inputs for a range of Japanese space manufacturing and satellite component supply chains. Japan's pushing to both diversify, recycle, try to develop systems and methods that reduce the need. It's got some rare earth minerals agreements under negotiation with Mercosur. It's working using Global South Official Development Assistance (ODA). In other ways, it's been going on. This disagreement with China has been going on really back to 2014 timeframe, and Japan's been working steadily at it. But it's pretty tough, and is going to require a lot of different actors um, to help mitigate the damage. One of the methods it's using is to leverage some rare earth minerals that were found from a distant island that's part of the Japanese island chain, but about as far away from Tokyo as you can get, the Minami Torishima Island. And Japan's found rare earth, pretty rich rare earth minerals in mud, but they're on the seafloor off this island at about 6,000 meters depth. So this particular vessel, the Chikyu research ship, was successful at doing a test boring earlier this year and is now out at the same site doing some additional exploration work. There's an additional effort amongst the Quad, the India, Australia, Japan, and US around Indo-Pacific maritime surveillance and a $20 billion critical minerals initiative targeted at mining, processing, and recycling. This is going to be an ongoing issue for several years to come, in my opinion. Keio University and Sony released a free and open source dataset called Ghost FWL. This is for helping people who work with LiDAR data. So LiDAR is a laser form of radar that's used a lot in autonomous vehicles, robotics, other things. It's often collected on the ground level, but also sometimes from satellites as well. A LiDAR in cities can be pretty problematic because glass, mirrors, and other surfaces in urban environments cause ghost reflections through something called multipath, where the laser bounces around between different surfaces. That kind of degrades the 3D mapping and accuracy of the localization. So Keio and Sony have done a bunch of work to develop a data set for finding this kind of ghost points. The new data set they're releasing has got 24,000 frames, 7.5 billion labels in it, and they're giving away under an open source, open data license. I'll put the link for that in the show notes. Japanese Ministry of Defense announced last week that they're building toward a larger space domain within the Ministry of Defense, growing the personnel to 880 people by the end of fiscal year 2026. That'll be March next year, as well as increasing the budget. That force has grown from only 20 people in a space operations squadron back in 2020 to about 670 this year, the end of fiscal 2025. It's March 2025. This new expanded group is going to be called the Space Operations Group. It's going to be a new command structure within the Air Self-Defense Force. And we'll have 3 space operations squadrons, a space support unit, and a space intelligence group. The budget also grew for FY26 at 174 billion yen. That's a little over $1 billion US. Like the personnel, it's certainly an increase over the past few years, but if you compare that to the US Space Force budget of $40 billion this year, that's 40 times the size of the Japanese budget, and an 11 billion increase over the previous year. It's still a pretty modest budget. But Japan operates in a pretty tough neighborhood. China alone has 237 defense and intelligence satellites, even 2 years ago, 2024, and doubtless many more today. Um, it's a challenging neighborhood, and Japan feels a need to beef up its own defenses. On the science front, the Hayabusa 2 deep space probe was able to successfully detect an exoplanet transit. This is pretty impressive. Hayabusa 2 has already visited one asteroid, sent back a sample return to the Earth, and is now on its way to an additional asteroids, one of which I think it will arrive in July, or do a flyby in July. But this is a separate effort. A team at JAXA was successfully able to use a navigation camera. So this is an optical camera on board Hayabusa that is used to orient itself against a star map. It's only got a 15 millimeter aperture, but it was able to detect an exoplanet transit across another star. This is the smallest aperture instrument in history to successfully observe this kind of transit from space. And the result suggests that even quite small cameras on deep space probes can perform some astrophysics on their way to doing other things. The paper was published in the Astronomical Journal. A bunch of deals this week. Sky Perfect JSAT became the first Amazon LEO reseller. LEO is going to be Amazon's new satellite communications system. Sky Perfect JSAT occupies probably a unique position. It can potentially pair its own geostationary orbit satellites with the Amazon low Earth orbit satellites to provide a more robust communications infrastructure. Sky Perfect JSAT also took an 800 million yen equity stake in Astroscale, one of the leading companies in the world for on-orbit satellite servicing and debris removal. This about a $5 million equity stake in Astroscale is part of a broader funding round, but this is as much a partnership as it is an investment, with an expectation that it'll enable Astroscale to leverage some of JSAT's geostationary satellites, though a timeline for that was not reported. iSpace and Japan Airlines signed a lunar payload service agreement for iSpace's Mission 3. This may seem a little premature, like why would Japan Airlines be sending things to the moon? But iSpace signed this agreement to send a 2-unit cargo component on. It's called the Argo project on the Lunar Mission 3, expected in 2028. It's also called a Mobius Arc container. It's going to include cultural and regional items to be delivered to the lunar surface. Finally, Hokkaido Spaceport has signed a feasibility study MOU with Firefly Aerospace. In addition to our rocket launch capacity being constrained, there's a spaceport shortage in many parts of the world, particularly in the United States, where a lot of the prime space launch facilities are taken by several larger companies, and smaller startups are having a rough time finding launch facilities. So Firefly Aerospace is looking into potentially launching from Japan, from Hokkaido, the far north island. This study is going to assess technical requirements and regulatory pathways for being able to launch from northern Japan and serve the broader Asian satellite market. Stocks in Japan for space and geospatial companies were generally down this week. It's unclear if, to me anyway, if SpaceX is soaking up the air supply in the run-up to its IPO, or if the Blue Origin New Glenn massive explosion last week has had an impact beyond the launch pad. But space equities have been in a slide since kind of the end of May. These are some legacy companies: Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi Electric, IHI, and Sky Perfect JSAT, all seeing declines since the end of May. Same thing for New Space, iSpace, Astroscale Holdings, Axel Space, QPS Holdings, and Dynamic Map Platform, all seeing declines since the end of May as well. Well, that's a wrap for the first week of the Japan Earth Observer YouTube channel. If you like what you see, please subscribe, and you can also get regular news roundups and in-depth stories like this through the Japan Earth Observer newsletter at japanearthobserver.com. It's a bit of an experiment, but I hope to see you again next week.